hey, you're young, and
There is a matter of trust, I think. Invite them to visit us.
it's almost like a part of family.
An app is a must for any present-day business.
We have taken two different approaches depending on the sophistication of the customer.
We've dropped that about 7 or 8 years ago.
It's well accepted.
We welcome everyone to visit Ukraine.
Thank you.
What I like about my today's conversation is that it's on the same street where I live, where my Airbnb in Melbourne is. So I'm just going out, and it's gonna be somewhere around the corner. Behind me is the building where I'm staying, and just a few footsteps away, on the other side of the street, there is the office of Silverpond.
Cool.
Yeah. So I wanted to start with a joke. So first of all, I want to present Jonathan, who's the head of the Silverpond agency specializing in AI and headquartered in Melbourne, Australia, where I happen to be today. So yeah, I wanted to start with a joke. So my favorite joke about artificial intelligence is that how do you distinguish between machine learning and artificial intelligence? Machine learning is when it's written in Python, and AI is PowerPoint.
It's a good one. I like it.
That's my favorite tech joke.
Do you see a lot of that happening in Ukraine and in Eastern Europe as well?
Yeah. Well, it's penetrated the entire technology market. So, well, we are not trying to be the vanguard of the technology. So we're not trying to get into every emerging technology because that would be it would kill us.
Yeah.
Basically, we would just spread the resources and never accomplish something. And so, how we approach this is that if the technology becomes popular enough, we are getting a project with it. And if we have to deal with it, we learn it, or we hire people who are proficient in it. So this is kind of our approach to this. We, of course, have already worked with ML, like Azure's machine learning framework for a customer in New York who was doing for loans. They wanted to calculate the probability of problems with those loans that they give out. It's an investment fund or something.
Yeah, I think there's still a lot of hype around AI, so it'll be interesting in the next 3 to 4 years as some of these companies will have to deliver against those promises. So it'll be interesting to see whether they can.
I like the recent article about AI. There's I think it's a Google engineer who was discussing like what an intelligence is in general, because we don't have the definition for artificial intelligence. What do you mean by that? Like an intelligence is the ability to learn anything, and now we have just tools focused on solving a particular problem. So it's not an intelligence as it should be. Tell me about the company. Why did you start it? You're the founder, right?
Yeah, so we've had an interesting journey. I think we originally started as like a software development agency, probably fairly similar to the one that you run. And this is going back about 12, 13 years. And we started the journey doing some .NET, but moved reasonably quickly into doing Ruby on Rails, which we did for a number of years.
It was popular?
Yep. And then we started looking at a bunch of functional programming kind of technologies. So we did some work in Clojure. We did look into Haskell, but it was very difficult to to kind of get Haskell to stick. And through that journey, we arrived at, I guess, like doing data science and machine learning. And I think throughout that journey has been just looking for a way for us to differentiate what we do out in the market.
Yeah, well, that's a very common recommendation to agency owners, that you gotta find a niche, and AI is a very interesting niche. By the way, I'm also very interested in this topic with finding the niche, because like there's a niche market versus all things to all people, right? And all things to all people doesn't differentiate you, and that's every book on agency business tells you that, right? So for now, my niche is SaaS, but it's still very wide, right? And they also say that you are not losing your old customers or word of mouth, because they're going to be referring you anyway. It's only the marketing that you need to change. So you just need to put your niche keywords on the main page of your website and direct all of your marketing into that niche, right? Did you see that in your experience?
So this transition into machine learning has probably taken about 4 or 5 years for us to do.
Did you deliberately close all of your previous accounts not related to machine learning, or?
I think we just went through a natural attrition over the previous accounts. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think we still have some customers that we work with from our software engineering days. Mm-hmm. But I think we didn't go actively chasing for the software engineering business with them. And that's primarily because we've been shifting the way people see Silverpond as a machine learning and AI business.
Why did you start the agency in the first place? I understand why it's an AI shop now, but why did you start the business?
Why did I start in the first place? That's a really good question. So I had built a CRM for car retailers or car dealerships. Mm-hmm. That was in partnership with 2 other guys. And when they sold that software to a distributor of software, I don't know, I just started freelancing. And I think for me it was a realization that when I was working for these other people, I didn't have, I guess, the control over the outcomes that I wanted. And the outcomes primarily being like the rate of development and learning, about the software engineering craft. And so there's nothing better than, when it is now your own business, you're ultimately responsible. You can never blame your boss because you are the boss, right? For why anything doesn't happen. Mm-hmm. And I think it's that ultimate kind of responsibility that helped, I think, set me on a lot of personal development.
Yeah. Well, that's a very good reason. How do you cope with the stress?
How do I cope with the stress?
Meditate, exercise.
Meditate, exercise. I have done both in the past. I grew up a Buddhist. I think it's learning to accept. Right, that's probably, and what's one of the hardest things, I think. Particularly as driven, ambitious people. Part of what drives us is just not willing to accept certain things. But I think that's also, where a source of the stress comes from, and I think it's realizing that just some things are truly out of your control.
Do you think it's easier for a Buddhist to cope with the stress coming from running a business, or is it the same for all people?
I think it's the same for all people. I think it's stressful nonetheless. Yeah, and I think it's just, between setting, goals and dreams and ambitions versus reality. I think, tell me about it. Yeah, that gap is the source of a lot of the stress, And I think that's kind of like learning to accept is definitely one of the hard things.
So when was that when you started the agency?
Maybe about 13, 14 years ago.
14, so pretty much the same time as I did.
Yeah.
And how many people do you have at the moment in the company?
We're about 16, 17.
16, 17. Yeah. And you think that size is optimal, or are you looking to grow it?
So we are looking to grow it, but I think what I've learned the last couple of years was we grew pretty quickly, and I think we had some challenges because prior to growing, it was basically me and a group of consultants. And as you can imagine, as we started to add people, not everyone can report to me. So building a management team, which I'm assuming you would have done. What's the size of yours? Probably in the...
Well, my company is 60 people.
Yeah, so you would have to have managers and all that.
Yeah. For the first 8 years, I was managing all the accounts, and it was when I look back at that, it was a burning hell. and then I started hiring project managers who are responsible for their accounts now, and I should have done that earlier because it's really a big improvement.
Yeah, so I think I went through a similar phase as well, and we've only just really put in like a senior management team the last couple of years, and it's been going through that transition and the cultural change that required for us. That was an interesting thing. And I think primarily because we were pretty much a tight-knit group of colleagues, and now they have less access to me. And I think that was difficult for a lot of the original people that I worked with.
Yeah, in my organization, people come to me whenever there is a non-standard situation or a conflict to resolve. Then I'm a kind of arbiter.
Absolutely.
In these situations, but the rest, we try to document processes as much as we can, so that it's easier for new people to get into the company culture and its practices, and it's also easier for everyone to know what to do.
Yeah.
Basically.
Did you ever struggle with that cultural shift required, where people had a personal relationship with you when you were much smaller to?
Of course. And there is stuff to turn over and everything.
Yeah.
So we had to lose a few people, and it's not.
Yeah. We've been through the same thing as well.
Yeah. So this is quite normal in a transformation like that. All right. And so as a new company, who was your first hire, or were you just a group of consultants working together, and then what would you consider the first hire? So at first you were a freelancer, and then when this second person started working with you, how did that happen?
So I think the second key person, so I did hire 1 to 2 people, but probably the key person that added to our team was a guy called Andy Kitchen. Andy Kitchen worked with us for quite a while, and helped us transition into a machine learning company as well. And he's now off doing his own kind of crazy startup, building the Matrix.
Really? You want to feed people to produce energy?
Maybe we should take a couple of minutes to explain his idea. So CC Labs.
Careful with the table, shaken. Yeah.
So with CC Labs, one of things that so the idea that they're currently working on is computation with real live neurons. So instead of imagining a silicon chip, right, you have real live neurons. I don't know what they call them, on whether it's on like some kind of wafer or something like that, and then you can program them, and you kind of program them by almost like constructing these simulated environments for them to kind of behave in.
That's very cool. Where does he get neurons from?
Where does he get neurons from? That's a good question. I am not sure where they get them from. Whether they're people or
pigs or...
Yeah, I do not know.
But that is very cool.
Yeah, so they do have like a bio-wet lab, and they're like putting all the infrastructure in place. And
I will ask you for a link to that because I'm
yeah, I'm more than happy to connect you with Hans. So Hans is the CEO, and Andy's, I guess, the CTO, who's kind of like helping him put it together.
It sounds indeed crazy, but there should also be some science behind it and so.
So there is definitely science behind it, no doubt. But I think when we were talking, me and Andy, what he wanted to try and do with his career, I couldn't really quite give him, even though we had transitioned into a machine learning company. At Silverpond, we don't do anything that crazy like that.
That's biotechnology already.
Yeah,
that's a completely different domain.
Yeah, and it's a very speculative kind of idea, right? Like that there is a market for people who would want to do computation in that particular manner. And it's probably too speculative for Silverpond to try and do. But hey, you're young, and you should definitely go and chase after some crazy ideas.
That's very cool. At least it would make a good market and good news.
Oh, absolutely does. Absolutely does.
All right. So how do you structure your company now? What's the structure?
So we have 4 different areas. So we have the kind of business commercial, headed up by Ed. We have our operations headed up by Yanni. We have our engineering team headed up by Lyndon, and our science team headed up by Ardal. And probably what's maybe not usual in agencies is this kind of science and engineering split. But we did that deliberately since like the science team has a very different focus to what the engineering team does.
And those heads of departments, are they hands-on on client projects as well? Or do they only do management?
Yeah, so given our size, we are all pretty hands-on. Yeah, in terms of interacting with customers, ensuring projects get delivered, etc.
All right. Do you have any products, or do you only work like an agency providing the service to your customers?
Yeah, so we have come from that agency and services background, and part of this transition the last few years has been into being a product company. So we have a product highlighter. Highlighter is a product that helps with the development of machine learning projects. It's focused on the development of the training and evaluation data sets. So we don't have technology that is like a TensorFlow or a PyTorch. Instead, what it's focused on is the management of the data that allows people to train these models. And it's our belief that this data is quite important, particularly since a lot of our customers work in regulated fields. And when they come and try and understand how these models work, inevitably they need to come back to what was the data that was used to train it, and what were the decisions that made in the construction of that training data. So Highlight is focused on those particular set of problems.
So it mostly generates data sets. Like
That's right.
Test data sets.
Yeah, so customers would be collecting data in some form or another. But when we started out the journey 5 years ago, a lot of the way we built these machine learning models was, on a data scientist's laptop, they run up their IPython notebook, and then how do you manage all this data? How do you manage all the different stakeholders? Like if we needed doctors to provide kind of annotations and review of some of that training data, how do you enable that when it might be sitting on one person's laptop? So it is, some of the infrastructure needed to be in place to kind of help manage and generate this training data, and that's what our tool does.
But that is something that you use in your services yourself.
So it's actually now both. So we do have customers that use it without our services. Some customers engage us purely on our services, and some customers we do with both. So we have our product and our services, and we use it in a combined fashion.
And is the product a gateway to your services? Because it's a very common model when you have a product that people start to use, and then to customize it or to use it more efficiently, they have to hire you to provide professional services based on that product.
Yep.
Is that something that you do?
So yeah, we have been asked to provide professional services around our product. Whether product is the gateway for services or service is the gateway for our product, I don't know which way is the correct lens, and I think we're still discovering as we go right now. Yeah.
All right. So speaking of growing the team, is it difficult to find an engineer or a data scientist or any relevant candidate in Melbourne?
I think the Melbourne market is reasonably competitive, and I think there's been an entrant of a number of well-backed, US and VC-backed companies into Australia. And they've been looking for talent, and so.
How long does it take you to find an engineer, a software developer?
2 to 3 months.
2 to 3 months. That's tough. In Ukraine, it's still about 1 month.
Yeah.
How did you personally learn to delegate with your company?
Delegating is such a challenging conversation. I think the probably the first step is to try and work out what people are capable of taking on. And I think that was probably one of the biggest challenges or mistakes that I've been making, is not having a clear idea of that. So, if you delegate them too much and it's, too hard for them, then you basically set them up to fail. You delegate too little, you're still then don't get any value of like why they've joined your team. And also I think, for talented people, they're like,
for me,
who to delegate to and how much.
Well, there's one insight that I had, and that was like that the CEOs or the managers duty is to understand the project, to understand the process, try to do it. I'm trying normally to do it myself, and then when I have an understanding like what steps needs to be taken to get this result and how this particular role works, then I can hire a person who has more experience than me, who's much better at this activity than me, and delegate it to them. So this is how I was delegating.
Mm-hmm. But how do you assess that person is actually better than you?
There is a matter of trust, I think, and also if there are some HR ways to assess that. Let's say there's a resume, you can ask the previous employer, and things like that.
I was just going to use one example, like a common gap for people, for technical people in particular, is when they go from, say, being like an engineer into management, and then it's like, how do you work out how much to delegate or how much training that they might need to actually, be successful in this new role that they've taken on?
Well, but it must be related to their previous experience, I think, and it's also, I think, better for them to be developing in this particular direction, and not trying to change directions from like purely technical role to purely managerial role, because then you are making a bad manager out of a good software developer.
Yeah. So do you set up a completely separate track for developers in your team that might go, you know what, I'm just going to be a very, very good developer that gets paid very well being a very good developer, and not worry about my career growth being as part of being in management?
Well, many developers prefer to stay developers actually, because they are better with the computers and with people, right? And for me, people was one of the most challenging things, because because my background is computers. Like, I've been programming since I was 8 years old.
Yes.
But what we practice in our company is a horizontal structure, where we don't have like heads of departments or managers. We have account managers / project managers who are as well a part of a flat structure organization. So whenever you ask someone who's your manager on this project, they say that on this project this guy, and on this project that guy, and I'm working on that project with that guy. So something like that.
And who's accountable? Do you have someone that is responsible for this, career development for some of your staff?
Well, yes, that's a blend of HR and project management team. So what they do whenever someone wants to improve their skills or it's required for a project, they set up an educational plan, and this person, let's say developer, has to go through it and acquire the skills required for an upcoming project or for something that's needed.
And how big is your HR team then?
The HR team is not big. It's just 2 people. One is the HR, and the other one is a recruiter.
I see. And I guess a recruiter kind of helps you, since as an agency, people is probably like the most important thing. So.
Yes, that's very important. And the role of a recruiter is very important. I'm not super happy with my current recruiter. So, well, the way once I heard how people describe the difference between the HR and the recruiter roles. Recruiter gives birth to babies and HR raises them. So they take in the recruiter is obviously responsible for hiring for the new hires, and then to keep them happy and to like facilitate all kinds of development and activities and loyalty in the company. That's the HR role.
Interesting, because I think we don't have a dedicated HR recruiter. Like we tend to rely on like the senior management team to perform the recruiting function.
You'll be surprised that the dedicated resource is way more efficient, because we also rely, as a smaller company, of course, we rely on our senior developers and project managers and everyone to interview and hire and get people interested in working with us. But you cannot do that efficiently, from my experience, without building an HR brand, right? Without like maintaining a certain company image on the job market. So that's something that HR has to do, and maybe a bit of marketing.
I see. Yeah.
But I see that you are doing that there is some activity that you do in this direction as well, like those meetups and conferences. I think those are mostly meetups that you're hosting, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. That's a great way to attract new candidates.
And is that something that is happening a lot in Ukraine as well? I kind of thought
we were among the first ones to set up this kind of format in one of our locations. So we have two locations. It's the capital city, Kiev, and Zaporozhye, which is 500 kilometers south from Kiev. And Zaporozhye is smaller than Kiev, and but it has two technical universities. And I think we were the first who started doing meetups there. Now it's picked up by other companies, but
it's pretty popular.
Yeah, we call them developer meetups. We invite people to our office. There are speeches and presentations, and it's quite fun.
And do they have like specific technologies for each of these meetups? Like, do you guys go a .NET meetup versus a Python meetup versus?
Well, it depends. Yes, normally it depends on the presentation that we have, and it may be around web development, or it can be around backend, about anything that we do mobile. So we announce those speakers and presentations, and then based on that, I think people decide whether it's interesting for them or not. But it's not always just backend. It depends on the meetup and on the speakers.
And who looks after those kind of like
HR.
The
HR and office management. Okay. So they prepare everything. They have a checklist for every meetup. What needs to be printed, what needs to be arranged, how the room should look like, and so how the attendants register, how we accept these registrations, who meets them at the entrance. So it's a very well documented process.
Very well run. Yeah. And what kind of technology trends are you seeing up in Ukraine?
We work on the global market, so we don't work on the Ukrainian market. It's very small, and it's not mature, I think, for services like that. Sometimes we're getting some inquiries from local companies, but I don't think that we have ever started working with any of them. So normally our customers are either from the United States or from Western Europe. But recently we are seeing interest in our services from like very unexpected parts of the globe. Like we have a few customers in Africa, for instance, in Zambia and Nigeria.
Interesting.
And we can work with them because our entire process is set up in such a way that we can work with remote customers anywhere. Of course, we also invite them to visit us, to sit with us in the office. We give them a desk and we take them on a tour to the bars and, and everything. But mostly the work is done remotely. And so the trends. What are the trends? Well, everything is in the cloud now.
Yeah, that's true.
Compared to when we started, it was all self-hosted.
Yeah.
Then what are the trends we are seeing? More Python. .NET is coming back. I don't know why. Also a lot of work in the beginning of this year. Unexpectedly, a lot of new customers, which is a good thing.
Yeah.
And shit, I don't like this noise on the mic. Let's see what we can do with the sound. Yeah.
Do you think the like the American and European markets are doing more outsourcing now, or like they're starting to bring it back in house? Because
I think everyone is comfortable with the idea of outsourcing now, because it was more difficult to persuade people to do outsourcing in the past, and now it's very common. So everyone has done it. Most of the leads I'm talking to are very comfortable with that. Is just the question is the choice of a vendor.
Yeah. And then do they? Because in the Australian market, we go through these cycles of where these larger businesses will try and outsource everything, and then they'll like work with lots of different vendors, and then at some point in time they go, oh, we should really insource everything and like we'll hire people and then take over all that kind of stuff.
With big enterprises and with corporates, it's always like this. It goes up and down. Like we outsource everything, we take everything in house. Outsource in house. That's normal for any big organization. That's just because the management changes. There was a guy in charge who was a great believer in outsourcing, and then the next guy says no, we will do everything in the house. I want to see them all in the office, just even at their computers. That's true. Speaking of customers. Are all of your customers Australian?
Most of them. Yeah, we've got.
If not Australian, from where?
We've got customers in Singapore and the US.
Mm-hmm. How's Singapore as a market?
Singapore, it's a big financial hub, and so the people that we work with, it's a family office that have a series of startup interests, and that they are basically engaging us to help them with some of their startup projects.
Mm-hmm. All right. And so, how did you get this customer? If I may ask.
Found us through our website. Yeah, I think actually both of our international customers found us through our website. We largely focus on the Australian market, and I think we feel like it'd be quite challenging for us to go and enter into like a Singaporean or an overseas market like the US.
But now that you have a customer there, if you make them happy, they will recommend you further. So you can expect more leads. This is how it always happens.
No, that is absolutely true. And I think we can't imagine particularly Australian service wages being competitive on a global market, say compared to the Ukraine, right? Mm-hmm. And so our differentiation will have to be something else. Probably primarily through our product. So I think the challenge we're imagining is like, what would be probably the local support team that might need to be present in some of these countries to help them adopt our product.
Well, you can send people on trips there.
Sorry?
You can send people on trips there.
Talk to you, you send a guy from Ukraine for us, and then we'll send the product.
Yeah, well, Singapore I think is far away from Ukraine. It's from Australia.
It is pretty far.
We can do joint efforts to build an office there, a support office. All right. So, and how do you normally acquire your Australian customers?
Probably a mix of word of mouth and everything. We've had some success in our efforts through the Meetups and the conferences, but probably most of our work comes through word of mouth.
Do you have a sales team?
So that would be Ed and myself. So Ed, who looks after the commercials and
an insight from me. So I saw a big growth in the amount of customers when I hired a salesperson. I mean, I had to change a few salespersons. Then I had to change to reformat my entire sales department. But with the current setup, I'm super happy because there was a report from them today on what they have done in the previous month. 2 new customers in 2 new countries, pretty big.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, just out of their own efforts, out of our inbound marketing, where we invest into marketing and search engine optimization. People find us.
Yes.
That's one channel. Another channel is active sales, like cold messages. Like it's not very efficient, but you have to be doing that because otherwise you depend too much on the word of mouth, and you depend very much on whether your customers are willing to recommend you further or not. And I think that's something that you need to be independent. So
Yeah.
it pays off. It pays off. It may be an investment at first, but then it pays off as it gets more customers.
So I guess right now it's me and Ed who kind of drives a lot of the efforts into like the sales side of our business.
Right.
And so where are you planning to take your career, now that you've started a successful 50, 60 person agency? Like, do you wonder, what's the next phase in your career? Or?
That's a good question. At the moment, I just enjoy doing what I do. It's been very interesting, and also good for my personal development because I get to learn a lot. I have to switch hats a lot. Right? On the same day, I may be doing marketing, sales, project management, some technical details of this project and that project in completely different industries. That's been very interesting, and I think I still like it.
Yeah.
So my ambition is probably would lie in the product development area. Even though I have done that in the past, when I was a kid, when I was 15 years old, I was developing a software. I don't know, how old are you?
37.
37. So do you remember the bulletin board systems, BBS?
Yes. Yeah.
So one of the softwares that was used to run a BBS was developed by me back in 1996.
Wow.
And it was very popular, at least in the post-Soviet space, right, in Eastern Europe. I had a big user base, and on every evening I would sit at my computer and process feature requests from my users, and working on my own improvements. And it was a very popular piece of software. So the only competition was Remote Access and Maximus. Those were two softwares, and mine was called Tornado BBS.
Oh wow!
And it was a purely product work, one-man show.
And you're interested in possibly looking at doing that kind of thing?
Probably.
Yeah.
So we are trying some ideas internally. We are trying to work on smaller products. I know it's not very efficient in the agency model because
it's hard.
Because once a customer wants more resources, they are just snapped from those internal projects and never put back. But we are trying to maybe limit them. Recently, we hired a project manager who would focus on those with the product owner background. So I hope we can set up a process for that as well.
Yeah, no, I know that it's been challenging for us to kind of make that transition ourselves.
I'm also looking to grow certain verticals and maybe convert them into separate brands. I have a very successful example of that by separating out and packaging my QA department as a separate brand. So now there is Redwerk, which does full cycle software development for SaaS systems, and there is QAwerk, which sells manual and automated quality assurance. I want to add maybe penetration testing or maybe a market that is a separate brand like security testing, and then the same way we could package and market our UI UX design team, which is anyway there. Search engine optimization. It's like you can do a lot. How do you feel when people leave the company?
How do I feel? Good question. I think when I very first started, it was very hard. I felt like it's almost like a part of family. But I think recently, I've taken the view that it's about trying to find the best fit for everyone. And so for a few of the people that have left, I've helped them find jobs elsewhere, either other agencies or with other companies. It's about trying to make sure that they fit with their skill set fits.
Yes, I was the same. So I was taking it very personally. But now I came up with a few reasons why it's even good for the company. Because it's first of all, it's an opportunity to document a certain process for a role. And then you get someone, a replacement sooner or later, who can bring you new ideas, who can shake it up a little.
I agree. I think one of the things I do look at is how to inject a sense of ideas and energy, and probably the best way to do that is to bring new people in.
Yeah. Because then there's burnout and people get bored, and then the same thing, no matter how interesting it was at first,
yes,
it all becomes boring and usual, right? So
It's true. It's true.
it's something that, and then with the customers, you can easily explain them because everyone has staff turnover, and if you lose a person on the project for some time, it's not it happens. You cannot prevent that.
Yes.
There's no cure from that.
Absolutely.
All right. How do you start a project? So let's say there's a new customer. What are the steps to start the project?
What are the steps to start a project? So we do a bit of, how do we describe it? What we call it discovery with the customer. And I think that's primarily because machine learning being fairly new, a lot of our customers don't even really know where the value is. And we do that primarily because there's a real risk that with machine learning projects, if there isn't value, they might start and then they'll go, why are we doing this? And then they'll probably just want to, exit or exit the project. So for us, like getting that value conversation right is pretty important for us to be able to continue doing machine learning with these customers. I found that kind of very different from, say, the software engineering space where no one really questions the value of building some of their software engineering products, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, we need to go and build an app. They don't really worry about whether there's value in having a software engineer go and build an app.
You can tell them that everyone's doing that, and an app is a must for any present-day business. So either you have an app or you're out.
Yeah, so we haven't
selling by fear.
yeah. Whereas right now we don't really quite have that in the machine learning space, other than the hype, right? And I think when you peel back beyond the hype, at some point, the decision makers will go, why are we spending this kind of money? We want to have very, very good answers for that. And so I think, that initial discovery phase then just sets up for whatever proposal that we end up putting in and the setup required to get a project up and running.
Mm-hmm. And then you assess a project, or how do you also communicate the budget required for the project, for instance? You lead for customer.
So how do we communicate the budget required?
What is based on your assessment, your estimate?
Yeah, so we have taken two different approaches depending on the sophistication of the customer. So some is estimated from the effort, and I guess some is from a cost-based perspective. And so some other customers, it's done more from I guess almost like a value-based perspective. And that latter one is where effectively the customer wants us to take on risk. It becomes packaged as like a fixed price project.
You still do that?
Yeah.
Because we dropped that about 7 or 8 years ago. It was burning hell, and it was like scope creep all over. And we said that we now just estimate. We give you a rough estimate, and then if anything happens, something unexpected pops up technology-wise, or if there is a new feature request, then our project manager is trained to communicate that to the customer. So you want this new feature, wasn't in the scope, it's going to increase the budget by this.
Yeah, so I think from the software engineering side, it's well accepted, in terms of how that works. I think for a lot of customers, at least in the Australian market, they're still experimenting with machine learning. And so they want to understand some tight bounds around the delivery of it. So that's kind of we just take on some of that risk to try and help grow this particular market.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right. So with us everything is hour based. So we estimate by the amount of man hours multiplied by the hourly rate, and then that's the goal.
Yeah. So we do our software engineering very, very much like that, where we would enter into some kind of agile software development process with our customers, and then it is just done by the hour.
Yeah, well, I'm also very interested in cultural differences. So you're saying that most of your customers are Australian, then they're Singapore and the US.
Yeah.
The US. How do you see the differences between those three locations?
How do I see the differences? I would say that for working with our Australian customers versus some of these overseas customers, it's tend to be a different kind of sense of focus. some of our overseas customers seem to be, and I think maybe because just like the nature of our overseas customers who approach us, have more of like a cost focus, whereas some of the Australian customers have more of a risk focus. They may be more concerned about some risk exposures that might be happening on a particular project. But I don't know whether that's because like Australian customers tend to be more enterprise customers, so they have that more kind of focus, whereas our overseas customers tend to be more startups. So and maybe that's the
more
reason.
open to ideas.
Yeah, maybe that's kind of like why they're more they have a different set of a different kind of focus. Yeah.
Right. And any risk mitigation that you practice? Any particular approaches to that?
In machine learning, like a lot of the challenges, almost things are outside of your control. So, for example, like when you train the model on data that is collected, typically we might not control how the data is being collected.
And if it's wrong, you get wrong results.
Yeah, and we don't control exactly how it gets annotated or labeled. We may not have that kind of exposure, and then often customers want to know, like, hey, can I get 99%? It's very difficult to promise that kind of thing. So there's a lot of expectation and kind of risk management around like various parts of this process that we have to put in place.
Right, and probably a lot of explanation is needed to explain that this kind of a solution is not going to give you 100% accuracy.
Yeah, right? Yeah. We have to set those expectations.
You have scripts for that. Sign here and here, and I also have to say this. Sign this with blood that you agree if you're not 100% accurate.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we have to do that kind of thing, particularly during the proposal phase. Yeah.
When was the last time you introduced a new practice in your company, like a new technology or a new vertical?
So we've transitioned through lots of different companies in our time at Silverpond. So I think I mentioned .NET, and then Ruby and Rails, and then functional programming, and then like data science and machine learning. I think the hardest thing has been to try and bring the team along to some of those things, particularly like if I'm the one to try and initiate some of these things. I'm curious to know like how you guys would have had to grow these kind of different capabilities, because I'm assuming you added like .NET and PHP and Python and over time, right?
Yeah. Well, we started as a Java shop doing e-government solutions for the Netherlands with the company there, which was the government's vendor for the entire country, and we helped them develop products. We were the hands, they were the brains. And then when we had to add new practices, then we just hired people with experience in those technologies. But we also have a few champions who, let's say, when they are finished with their current, with their last project, they're like, what do we have here? All right, I was doing .NET, Ruby. Hell yeah, I want to learn that. So they would jump on new technologies and eager. They are very eager to learn that. But that's rare. That's a minority, because the rest want to develop in this particular direction. I want to become, let's say, a PHP guru, knowing all the frameworks in PHP. That's my career path that I'm seeing. I'm fine with that. So, but if you have certain gaps in projects in that particular technology, that may be a problem. Of course, we will lose this developer.
But do you ever find that like you need multiple almost streams of business to actually feed, these capabilities? Like for example, if you win a large Java project, and then you need more Java people, but then you don't have any work for your PHP people, and how do you manage?
Exactly. So we are trying to manage that with our marketing and sales activities. So whenever, let's say, we have a gap or less projects than resources that comes to utilization on a certain technology stack, of course we try to intensify our efforts to sell that particular expertise. It doesn't always work out. It's not very predictable. It's not like a very stable outcome, but you have to try that. And also, if you aren't doing a technology popular enough, or if you get to choose a technology for a new project, then it becomes, of course, easier because you can choose the technology that you have resources for.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think you've chosen technologies that all have pretty big, use bases.
Yeah.
It's not like
It's
you
not,
guys
it's
are
not,
doing
it's,
Haskell
it's,
or
it's not
something.
Haskell, exactly. That's the technology that I wanted to mention. All right. Well, all right. To wrap up, have you heard anything about Ukraine?
One of our colleagues, because it's from Ukraine.
All right. What do you think about it?
What do I think about him or Ukraine?
Him and Ukraine and Ukrainian developers. What is what do Australians normally know? That's what I'm interested in.
What do Australians normally know? That's a good question. I don't think a lot of Australians probably have exposure to Ukraine. They probably think it's just a part of the kind of Soviet or Russian kind of culture.
Mm-hmm.
Probably just seen as good engineers or good mathematicians, typically. I don't know, I'd like to visit. Because our colleague is from there, and
Please come visit us.
I think my wife is French, so I do have reason to go to Europe quite a bit. So maybe I'll drop by.
When was the last time you went to Europe?
April last year.
Because it's quite a trip from here.
It is a trip. Yeah, my in-laws are down from France, and she was like, my mother-in-law was like, 38, 40 hours. It's such a long.
But it's Australia. It's far away from everything.
It is true.
So
Yeah.
It's So we welcome everyone to visit Ukraine, to visit us, our office, go out with us to experience the nightlife and the bar scene and everything. So next time you're in France, please do take some time and come to Kyiv, at least for a weekend.
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right. Thank you for the conversation.
Thank you. Yeah.